The July ACT is in less than 11 days, but most people haven't even started studying. So, in today's video, we're going to be covering everything you need to know about the ACT in order to begin your last second cramming. And don't worry, we'll include tips and tricks for every section along the way. So, unless you want to end up with this score, stick around until the end of the video. Now, to start the video off, let's go over a basic scoring guide for the ACT. As you can see here, this student scored a 33 on their ACT, and that is their composite score, which is an average of their 4 subsection scores. So an average of their math, science, English, and reading score. And as you can see here, if you add them up, divide them by 4, you get your average, which is 32.5. And fortunately, the ACT rounds your score up as long as it has 0.5 or above, which means this student scored a 33. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the science section is actually optional, but PrepHub does recommend that you take it, as for most students, it's actually the easiest to take, and we've even had students who've scored 36s with little to no studying on science. All right, so let's get right into the first section that you're going to see on your ACT, which is the English section. Now, this section only gives you about 45 minutes for 75 questions, which means you only have about 36 seconds per question, and you're going to have to move pretty fast. Now, the actual format of this section is a little different from what you're used to on the SAT. And the reason for that is because with your grammar, you're going to have about 5 very long passages, and you're going to be making changes to singular sentences throughout the passage. So as we can see, this first passage alone has 15 questions about it. Now, the way it works is, as you can see, this passage, this sentence right here, is underlined and has 1 written below it. So what that means is that this sentence is related to question number 1. So question number 1, there's actually no question written, but it's basically asking us what change do we want to make to the underlined portion, right? And so when we see this, we can realize that, okay, well, do we want to make no change? So is the sentence already correct, or do we want to change it to one of these sentences? Now, the correct answer is going to be D, because raised to a height of 5'6" has to be referring to the bar, not to the sophomore. Now, if you don't understand exactly why that works, stay tuned for a future grammar video. But let me show you 2 quick tips to do really well on the grammar section. So tip number 1 for English is going to be all about pattern spotting. So looking at question 55, as you just learned, it's asking us what we should replace this word right here with. So should we leave it as is, or should we change it to has been, were, or was? Right? So what that means is if we were to select A, no change, that would basically be us saying, well, leave it as is. Okay? And so the little trick here, which you can only know to do if you spot the pattern, is the odd one out trick. And so what this little trick is, well, for this question, this is a subject-verb agreement question. So we have to figure out if the answer is singular or plural, right? So is, has been, were, or was. All we need to do is test if it's singular or plural by testing a word behind it. So what I like to test it with is he versus them or they, right? So for example, could we say he is? Yes. But could we say they is? No. So we have he is, so that's singular. He has been, that's singular. He were, that's not singular. And then he was, that's singular. Now let's test it with they. They is, that doesn't work. They has been, that doesn't work. They were, that works, that's plural. And then they was, that does not work, that's singular. So what is our odd one out? Well, our odd one out is the plural one, which is C, and so C is our correct answer. Now, the way this ties back into the tip is that you can only get this question correct if you're able to spot the pattern of what they're asking you to solve for, which is really if it's supposed to be singular or plural. Now, tip number 2 for English is actually pretty dang simple. It's just know the rules. Now, you're probably thinking this is pretty obvious, but here's the thing. For a lot of these questions, like this one above, you're going to be really tempted to try to do it by simply reading the answer choices out and seeing which one works right in your head. The issue with that is that that's going to cap you at a pretty low score, because there are a lot of questions that actually sound correct in your head, but are actually wrong. And so if you choose those answer choices, you're going to get the question wrong. And that's why it's important to know these rules. So here you can see a specific list of all the rules you need to know. And if you learn all of these, you'll be going off of the rules rather than what sounds correct. And that's going to allow you to maximize your score. Now, taking a look at the second section that you're going to see on the ACT, this is the mathematics section, and you get 60 minutes for 60 questions, so 1 minute per question. Now, this is pretty self-explanatory. One good thing to know is just that the questions will get harder as you go. So question 1 is going to be a lot easier than question 25, and 25 is going to be way easier than question 60, which should ideally be the hardest question on the test. So just know that you're going to need to save a lot more time for the last 10 questions, and so the earlier questions need to be done in less than a minute. Now, let's show some actual tips for the math section. So our tips for the math section are going to be all about how to guess in the best way, right? There are no little tricks to solve the questions, right? Most of them, you just have to do them the long and hard way. But if you could guess properly, you might be able to get yourself some free points. So the first thing I want to let you all know about guessing, do not choose this answer choice K. Cannot be determined from the given information. Statistically is not correct as often as the other answer choices, right? So we have 5 answer choices. You would assume that each has about a 20% chance of being correct, right? So guessing any of them has an equal chance of being correct. That's not true. It's been found over thousands of tests that cannot be determined from the given information is correct less than 20% of the time, which means you should never guess this. The other thing is that it's actually less likely for G or H or these middle values to be the correct answer, which means your best method of guessing is going to be either the top value or the fourth value. So in this case, it could be F or J, or it could be A and B, and those are the best things to guess. Me personally, I always choose D. Now let's look at the third section on the ACT, and this is going to be the reading section. In this, you have 35 minutes per 40 questions, so a little bit less than 1 minute per question. Now you can see this is an annoyingly long passage, and then you're going to have to answer roughly 10 questions about it, right? So the best strategy here, and this is really a tip that I'm going to be giving for this section, is just go slow and read the passage as a whole, right? A lot of people will recommend skip the passage, go to the first question, and then find the answer to this question back in the passage. What I recommend is that that's actually going to take you way more time, and you're going to end up wasting your time. So instead, go slow, read through the whole passage, understand what they're saying, what they're talking about, and you're going to be able to answer all of these 10 questions without having to look back at the passage a single other time. Now, let's look at the final section that you're going to see on your ACT. This is the science section. And similar to the reading section, you only get 35 minutes for 40 questions, which means you need to do each question in under a minute, right? Now, my big tip getting straight into it for this section is pretty simple. You don't need to know science, so don't get overwhelmed. As you can see, these graphs seem really complicated. We're talking about these complicated things. And what I'd say is really, you don't need to know any of the topics. You don't need to know physics, chemistry, or biology. All you need to know how to do is read from graphs, right? What the ACT thinks and says about their science section is that it's all about science reasoning. And so what that means is it doesn't matter if you have pre-knowledge, you already come into the test with knowledge on science. That doesn't matter. What actually matters is, do you know how to read these graphs and how fast can you do it? So one thing that they love to do is they put the graphs on a separate page from your question. So when you read this question, you're going to have to look back and turn the page to see the answers. So make sure you go extra fast, and that's going to be my tip. Don't get overwhelmed, because we don't need to know science on the ACT science section.